All right. All right. All right, this stream is live, so I will start taking your questions. If anybody's here, if anybody's watching, if you have questions or concerns about the interim exam that we are starting tomorrow night, that is tomorrow. Oh, I see people are on here. Great, fantastic. If you have questions or concerns, you guys let me know and start asking questions. I can see them in this chat box, and I will answer them on the stream that you can see. There's a pretty long delay after I talk and when you'll actually hear me. I guess you guys can't tell that though, because whatever. So you guys ask me questions and I will start posting answers as soon as you guys let me know what you want to go over. All right, Populist Party. Good question. Goals of the Populist Party were pretty simple. The Populist Party, founded in 1892. Its major goal was to help the common man. And the common man were people that were supposed to equal like farmers, ranchers, miners, and also because at the same time as westward expansion, industrialization was going on. The Populist Party wanted to help industrial and factory workers. And they wanted to make sure that they could have one of those groups to have a voice in government and be represented. Basically, the Populist Party felt that, and the people who founded the Populist Party, they felt that the current political parties at the time, the Democratic and Republican Party, were not listening to the needs and wants of regular people. I'm doing the thing. Please don't put that on. I don't have a quiet room in the house, so you'll hear my wife ask me questions and stuff throughout this, and maybe the baby will cry too, and the dog will bark. But ignore that stuff and just focus on the review stuff and questions you have. One of the other big things that came up that the Populist Party really pushed for, I mean, they wanted government control of the railroads. That was a big issue. But something else that they really wanted was free coinage of silver, which meant that they really wanted silver to be made into coins and to back U.S. currency. The economic ramifications of like making silver part of the U.S. currency and what currency is and what money is complicated. But basically, in the 1890s, and up until the 1950s and 70s, or up until the 40s, and then later on the 1970s, your U.S. dollar, paper dollars, were backed and supported by gold. The Populist Party wanted silver to also be part of the stuff that backed U.S. money, and they wanted to do that so that to cause inflation, so that there would be more money in the economy, and that farmers, ranchers, and miners would be able to get more of it, and factory workers would be able to get more of it. So those are the big goals of the Populist Party. And all this came because, for the most part, the Populist Party developed because the United States was changing a great deal during the time period after the Civil War. After the Civil War, large numbers of immigrants were coming into the United States. The Populist Party did not like immigrants. They didn't want them to own land. The United States also transitioning from a farming economy to an industrial one. Workers, most of the work done in factories was low-skilled work, or not for skilled workers. Like, anyone could step into a factory and work on an assembly line, for example. The Populist Party wanted those workers to have higher wages, safer conditions, a shorter workday. The Populist Party also, because the farmers, ranchers, and miners were moving out to the West, they wanted them to have an opportunity to make a living out to the West, because the United States was changing in that regard as well. And the Populist Party said they were going to help farmers, ranchers, and miners, be able to have a fresh start, be able to make a living in the West and the Midwest. So that's the Populist Party. What other questions do you guys have? Anything else I can go over and answer for you? Westward expansion, Reconstruction, maybe go over maybe even primary and secondary sources, anything about business. Any questions you have at all? I will also, I guess you guys should know, I will also post, you guys can, I think you guys should be able to see my screen. You should be able to see a, what's that thing called? A Google Slides presentation with all the information that I'm going over on it. I will post this on to Google Classroom as soon as we're done tonight. Maria, is Plessy versus Ferguson based on segregation? Yes. I mean, I wouldn't phrase it exactly that way, but yes. So Plessy versus Ferguson is a Supreme Court case that is decided in 1896. So the first thing we have to know about Plessy versus Ferguson, it does have a lot to do with segregation. I mean, Plessy versus Ferguson led to segregation, or legalized segregation in the South. It became part of the actual laws in the South that black and white people had to be separated. Really, white people and anybody that was not white had to be separated. So the case takes place after Reconstruction. So remember, Reconstruction ended in 1877, but Reconstruction is over, which means the Northern Army, the Union Army, and the federal government were not watching southern states to make sure they were following 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And you guys remember that the 13th Amendment, we'll just write these in too because it's important. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to any person born or naturalized in the United States. Really, it's supposed to provide equal protection under the law for all citizens. And then the 15th Amendment, the actual wording of the 15th Amendment is that you could not deny the right to vote to a person based on the color of their skin, previous conditions of being in slavery, their religion, ethnicity, things like that nature, national origin. But specifically, the 15th Amendment was written to give African Americans the right to vote. Basically, you guys know that after Reconstruction, basically, even while the Northern Army, during Radical Reconstruction, even during that time period when the Union Army was in the South, trying to watch the South, make sure they weren't breaking, to make sure they weren't breaking the rules. A lot of people in the Southern states tried to circumvent these amendments. They tried to get around them. They tried to deny rights for freed slaves, for African Americans in the South. So Plessy versus Ferguson is taking place after 1877. So the Southern states were basically at that time making all kinds of rules and laws to make sure that African Americans wouldn't have the same rights and privileges that everyone else would have. Southern states started to pass laws in the 1890s, like the one that was challenged in Plessy versus Ferguson. So I can write that Southern states started to pass laws that separated people in the South based on the color of their skin, or family history in public places that everyone used. Like, for example, in this case, this law applied specifically to train cars. Now, in Louisiana, where this case took place, a group of African Americans, knowing or believing that the law violated or broke the 14th Amendment because it separated people based on race, and they believed that because the law separated people in the South, that it was in effect denying equal rights and citizenship, to different people, that the law passed in Louisiana was unconstitutional. So Homer Plessy, who is the plaintiff in the case, challenged the law, was arrested. Again, purposely broke the law, was arrested, challenged the legality, the constitutionality of these laws separating people based on the color of their skin or their race. And basically in 1896, the Supreme Court, and this answers your question directly, Maria, the Supreme Court decided that legalized segregation was constitutional so long as the separate facilities were equal. And that's the legacy of Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson basically in Southern states. Now, what we also end up knowing happened is that, with Jim Crow laws now becoming allowed, according to the federal government, according to the Supreme Court, Jim Crow laws were passed to restrict and segregate just about every single possible location in the South, including education. Schools were segregated, but the type of education you could receive was also separated. We know that relationships between people were separated, and just as well as just any kind of physical place, water fountains. Water fountains were separated, for example, bathrooms, movie theaters, laundromats, where you could eat in a restaurant. Everything was separated by Jim Crow laws. Next question I'm seeing is business structures. So we wrote this in our notes in class, Thomas, during period 4. And I see a couple people asking this question. So business structures. So the most important thing to remember about business structures in terms of the Industrial Revolution is that corporations became more prominent. They were more widespread. Corporations, describing and explaining what a corporation is legally is complicated. We don't need to know those specific individual facts and details. What you need to know is that a corporation is a business that is owned by stockholders. Stockholders own a part. Stockholders apparently is one word. I don't know why I cannot spell tonight. Stockholders own part of the company. During the Industrial Revolution, corporations became a more prominent business structure because corporations could easily raise money, and they still can. Corporations can easily raise money to invest in the company by selling shares of ownership. When a company first incorporates and sells part of its ownership to the general public, when you purchase that ownership in the company, you are providing that company with money, and that company therefore uses the money to invest in itself in some way, shape, or form. During the Industrial Revolution, corporations were able to purchase factories, lots of raw materials, machines, and pay large numbers of workers to work. Basically, they were more easily able to afford mass production. This became a big deal. Basically, we also know that mass production is this system in which lots of goods are produced, lots of the same good are produced in large quantities in very short amounts of time. Let's go over here. That's not what I want. Most of the time, mass-produced goods are cheaper to produce and therefore cost less for the consumer. The best example of mass production being used to change the price and availability of a good is Henry Ford's Model T car. Like if we were to Google, for example, you could do an image search of a city street 1920s. The picture that I think will show up, these don't really help. Let's search cars because where are we? Like this video would demonstrate and show how many different people, how many different cars were available. All these different cars became available to people during and after the Industrial Revolution because of mass production. And it wasn't just cars, but almost any sort of good that you could possibly imagine went into mass production. It meant that it was much, much cheaper to produce, for people to buy those goods, and therefore more people bought those goods. So for a variety of reasons, you have corporations becoming the dominant business structure during the Industrial Revolution. They were able to raise lots of money that allowed them to industrialize. Because they were able to industrialize and mass produce goods, they could sell them at lower prices than companies that were not doing that, small businesses, for example. And as a result, they became more widespread. They could sell to more people, and therefore they made greater profits. People preferred to buy the less expensive good, which drove smaller businesses out of business, or at least they weren't as profitable or powerful as the corporations were. So the big thing to know about the change in business structure is that corporations became more prominent and widespread. Now, some of these corporations became more powerful than others. We read in class about some of these specific examples. Probably the best example of, and so we'll talk about some big business leaders. Some of those big business leaders that these people who led these major corporations were, like, for example, Andrew Carnegie, who was in the steel business. Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was in transportation. John D. Rockefeller produced oil. And J.P. Morgan, who did a lot of different things, including transportation, steel production, general investment. One of the other questions I'm seeing right now that is incredibly helpful, or an important question to go over, is a trust. A trust is when multiple corporations in the same industry come together under the leadership of one person or small group of people. Let me see. All right. Where is format? I just want lines. Can't think of any oil corporation names, but probably the easiest way to think of it is multiple corporations are run and organized by a larger oil company. All these businesses kind of surrender a little bit of their ownership and control to be led by a single group. All right. All these companies come together under the leadership of a single group so that they can kind of control exactly what goes on in the market. All right. Trust in business, business structures. We did. The big business structure you have to know is corporations, reconstruction plans. There were three basic plans, even though two of the plans ended up being very similar. This is not the final point. I don't know what that is. Tyler, it is good to see, good to see you. I'm glad that you're so interested in relearning U.S. history in the 9th grade. Final point. Not actually the final point, but let's do reconstruction plans. Yay. This isn't a downer at all. So there were three plans. Abraham Lincoln's plan, Andrew Johnson's plan, and then the radical Republicans. Abraham Lincoln wanted to, I don't like the way this is formatting. This is silly. Let's do everything to the left. Good. Abraham Lincoln wanted to restore the North and reunite the North and South into one nation ASAP. And as a result, he required basically just that. Required 10% of the people in each rebel state pledged loyalty to the new U.S. government or to the U.S. government. That's Abraham Lincoln's basic plan. And Abraham Lincoln may have wanted to do more things or may have actually ended up doing more things, but Abraham Lincoln was assassinated shortly after the Civil War was won by the North and basically didn't get to put his plan into place. Instead, Andrew Johnson put his plan into place. And we know that Andrew Johnson wanted to be tough on the South. He said he was going to take away property and jail Confederate leaders. But Andrew Johnson basically ended up doing the same sort of thing. So we're just going to write, in action, Johnson also tried to reunite the North and the South as soon as possible. In doing so, though, he forgave Confederate leaders, returned property, and allowed Southern states to rebuild themselves. We know the legacy of Andrew Johnson's plan ends up being pretty terrible. Andrew Johnson, as a result of putting his plan into place and allowing Southern states to rebuild themselves, and especially the fact that Southern states were able to rebuild themselves under the leadership of former Confederate leaders, implemented measures that basically made the South into as close as the South possibly could. They made the South back into what it looked like before the Civil War, by passing slave codes or black codes to basically return freed slaves to conditions of servitude. And the laws that were passed were supposed to look a lot like slavery, but then also if a freed slave broke one of the laws in place by the black codes, and they weren't able to pay a fine, for example, that went with that was the penalty for breaking the law. They were put in jail and basically re-enslaved, because the 13th Amendment actually says that you're not allowed to be a slave unless you break a law. So the southern states made laws that freed slaves would definitely be in violation of, so they could reinstitute them into slavery, basically. And then the radical Republicans put their plan in place. Well, we should write down the years. Andrew Johnson put his plan in place from 1865 to 1867. The radical Republicans hated Andrew Johnson's plan, and there was a lot of resentment and confrontation between the two groups when Johnson put in his plan basically unilaterally. Did the government have a say in Andrew Johnson's plan? Well, Andrew Johnson Andrew Johnson is part of the federal government. He implemented his plan when the congressmen, the senators, the members of the House of Representatives were not in session. Implemented his plan, forgave the Confederate leaders, and allowed them to rewrite their own state constitutions. So the government sort of had a say, but didn't. He did it. Andrew Johnson implemented his plan without the consent of the Senate or the House of Representatives when they were out of session. Every year, the House of Representatives and Senate, they have times where they go back and they're with their constituents in their home states, in their home districts. It even happens today. And presidents still can do these things today. But at this point in time, Andrew Johnson put his plan into place, and bad things happened. The radical Republicans were very upset with this, and they actually fought Andrew Johnson a great deal on what was going on in the South. They did not like the conditions that were implemented by, like, for example, black codes. They passed a Civil Rights Act that guaranteed that black Americans couldn't be treated the way that black codes were treating them. The president actually vetoed this law, and for the first time in history, the veto was overridden by both houses of Congress. So there's a lot of contention between the president, Andrew Johnson, and the radical Republicans and Republicans in Congress during Reconstruction. There was so much animosity between them that it ultimately led to Andrew Johnson's impeachment. He was not removed from office, but he was impeached. The radical Republicans, plain and simple, they wanted to punish the South, and they believed the South could not be trusted to rebuild on their own. As a result, they put the Northern Army into the South to kind of watch over the Southern states rebuild. And they forced Southern states to pass the 14th and 15th Amendments. But basically, they wanted to punish the South. Those are the big parts for Reconstruction. Let me see what else we have going on. The National Grange. The National Grange Camorra is similar to the Populist Party, and in fact led to the Populist Party probably becoming a thing. Let's write it up here. So that's basically the National Grange and the Farmers Alliance. Sometimes you'll see the National Grange called just the Grange, and sometimes the members just called the Grangers. The groups tried to cooperatively farm and cooperatively bargain with railroads and uh, farm equipment distributors or farm supply distributors so that they could get lower prices. They tried to help each other farm and harvest all together so they were doing less work. They tried to set price limits, and they also tried to negotiate with the railroads together to get lower railroad rates. Laissez-faire goes with the Industrial Revolution. This is a super important quote. Laissez-faire is a French word, and it literally means hands off. And it refers to an economic policy or philosophy in which the government avoids making rules and laws for businesses. That means they would not make minimum wage laws or worker safety laws or work hour laws, or they wouldn't pass laws and rules to inspect businesses, corporations, things like that. Generally speaking, in general, and this is kind of sort of during the early parts of the Industrial Revolution, especially when it was first happening, the federal government avoided intervening in business affairs. This is a general statement. It's not entirely 100% like true, because the federal government did help businesses. For example, they loaned massive amounts of money to the railroad companies building the Transcontinental Railroad. So they weren't hands off in that respect. And they weren't hands off when it came to Native Americans. Native Americans were living in the land that the Transcontinental Railroad was building on, and they sent federal troops out to help the railroad companies continue to build the Transcontinental Railroad. So they weren't entirely hands off, but they generally were in other areas. They did not have worker safety laws, for example. There were no minimum wage laws during the Industrial Revolution for most of it. There was no maximum work day. There were no rules or laws that regulated safety conditions or production of food. The government was, in a lot of ways, not terribly involved in the U.S. economy. So that's laissez-faire. Free silver, Maria, is, where are we? Let's go back to the Populist Party. This is free silver. It's a major policy of the Populist Party. They wanted silver to be made into coins that supported and backed U.S. currency. The main goal was to create inflation so that there's more money in the U.S. economy, and that would be better for farmers, ranchers, and miners. So that's free silver. Westward expansion, Tommy. Westward expansion is, westward expansion is the United States moving and settling into the West between, 1803 to, I guess, the early 1900s. Let's see. See, this is going to work. This is westward expansion, is that the United States over here expanded to the West. Ignore those other words. This is a slide template with the visual for westward expansion. Whatever. That doesn't have to be perfect. This is westward expansion. Tyler trying to learn. Tyler, I'm fine with you hanging out. I'm hope that things are going well. I haven't seen you at the high school yet this year, but I hope things are moving along. Businesses for Morgan and Carnegie we did. Reconstruction plans we did. Business structures we did. A trust in business. Oftentimes, Toy Fox swag. Trusts oftentimes cause monopolies or led to monopolies. All right, we're almost 8:45. I'll take questions until, if you guys still have stuff that you want to go over, until about 9. But I know that this presentation answers a lot of those things so far. We have Populist Party, which addressed a lot of the problems of westward expansion, or tried to. It eventually ended up going away, and was their major ideas were all kind of enveloped by the Democratic Party in the early 1900s. We talked about Plessy versus Ferguson. And how Plessy versus Ferguson and Southern states tried to circumvent the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments and tried to deny rights for African Americans in the United States, or especially in the Southern states. And at the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court basically decided that that sort of circumvention, like getting around those amendments, was allowed as long as facilities for Black and white people in the South were set, as long as the separate facilities were equal. Businesses, November 1606, corporations became popular during industrialization because they could easily raise money to invest in the company. Basically, corporations could afford to industrialize when a lot of small businesses could not. Industrialization was incredibly expensive. I guess as a visual, let's see. Tools, spelling, explore. What's explore? Search your docs and the web. Let's do that. That's really neat. Factories during industrialization. Let's see what we got here. What this one looks like when it's a little bigger. Oh, that's typing. That's not so fun. What do we got? Factories, industrialization. We'll check out some of those pictures later. Where's a factory with lots of people? Whatever. This one works. Okay. So this is actually it looks probably like it was in Henry Ford's auto factory. But basically everything in this factory costs lots of money, right? Like everything in this factory cost all kinds of money. Like you got to pay the worker, that's money. And not just that worker, but this worker. And this worker needs money. And this guy costs money. And all these people that you can't even see in the background need money. And there's all sorts of these guys on this line here. This guy needs money. He needs to get paid. This guy needs money. I mean, everybody needs to get paid. You got all these people that need to get paid. All these guys, this guy, this guy. Then you got, look at this huge box of stuff. That costs money. These wheel thing looking things cost money. All these things right here cost money. All these boxes of things cost money. This wheel costs money. You guys kind of see where I'm going here. Everything is really expensive. All these machines cost money. The building and the floor cost lots of money. So industrialization, like building things in factories, cost a lot of money. Corporations could really, really quickly and easily raise the money to pay for these things. And then when they did, the businesses, generally speaking, were more profitable than small businesses that didn't have industrialization. The United States industrialized primarily because, yeah, it is a lot of money, science. Everything, that's because it costs a lot of money. The United States industrialized, like when you say why did the United States choose to industrialize? Well, people inside the United States chose to industrialize because this sort of way, because there's a lot of different reasons. Number one, I guess, is it's a big country and there's lots of people inside the United States. The United States businesses could sell goods to all those people and make lots of money. And selling to more people means making more money. To sell to more people, you have to industrialize. Like why the U.S. industrialized is incredible. Like how it industrializes is a more simple question to answer. There were a variety of different things that caused the United States to industrialize. New technologies. The fact that the United States had lots of natural resources is a major reason the United States industrialized. And we have these things in our notes. Let's go back to Explore for a second and search my drive. These are the basic reasons how the United States industrialized so quickly. So you have this in your notes that you can go over with that. But like why it industrialized is probably most likely easily explained with this explanation. The United States has a system of an economy where individuals can make lots of money and keep it for themselves and raise their standard of living. Industrialization for the people that were the leaders made lots of money. And that's basically why the United States industrialized. More questions? Well, I guess I can't insert that into Drive. That's weird. The Farmers Alliance, Joe Smark, was an organization much like the Populist Party that tried to help farmers ease the difficulties of farming and settling in the West and the Midwest. The big thing that the Farmers Alliance and the National Grains did were cooperative farming. That's probably the most notable thing. Cooperative farming. And they threw lots of festivals and dances and farmers markets to help farmers kind of get. I'm distracted because my wife is singing in the background. She's a terrible singer. I hope that you guys can't hear her. Hey, Andrea. What? Everyone can hear you. All right. Thanks. So the Farmers Alliance tried to just establish and set up things for the farmers to have an easier time being farmers in the West and the Midwest. It was tough to be a farmer. The geography was tough to farm in. The large scale irrigation projects they needed to have installed in the West and the Midwest to provide water for crops were expensive. The Farmers Alliance tried to help alleviate those things. And then just to raise morale for farmers, there were festivals and get-togethers that were held and organized by the Farmers Alliance to make things easier and better for them. More questions? The main reason Chinese Americans came to the United States was to become miners. I mean, that's I guess that's a complicated question. There's a lot of reasons that people from China came to the United States. China at the time in the mid 1800s was going through major changes as a nation. It had previously kind of been isolated from a lot of the rest of the world. In the mid 1800s, that changed. China was forced to open its borders to trade and was not entirely ruled over by outside countries, but pretty close to was basically ruled by outside countries. And a lot of people in China didn't like that. They started to leave China for that reason. There's a lot of instability in China. So they came to the United States because there were rumors that the United States was a place where it was easier to make a living and that you could get very rich. A lot of Chinese came to the United States to be miners, but they took jobs working on the railroads because that was guaranteed that included guaranteed wages. So that's their main reason, basically just for the reason that most immigrants come to the United States is they believe that there are more opportunities to create a better life for themselves, or because there was instability in their nations. That won't be on the test tomorrow, but that's a good question. All right, it is 9 o'clock, which means it's pretty close to everyone's bedtime, especially mine. Um, I'll take one more question. If it's up and posted in like 45 seconds, I'll answer it quick. But otherwise, I'm going to post this presentation here onto Google Classroom now. Let me see if I can do that while you guys are still here. Can you see me do that? Exodusters. Good question, Just Mark. Exodusters were freed slaves living in the South that moved to Kansas in 1877. That's in your notes, guaranteed. If you did, like, let me see what your notes say. We'll do that in a second. If I go over into my drive.google.com, you were probably in class for this on Monday. Olivia Exodusters. There we go. You got it in here, Joe's Mark, or you're supposed to. Let's see. Nope, not there. Maybe here. exodusters. African Americans moved west to escape racism and have freedom. All right, I'm going to post that on Classroom right now. Let me see. Western expansion. Let's do, I'll just put exodusters up for just mark exodusters. That's exodusters. This bridge is not a picture of exodusters. But these are famous exodusters. That's not helping. All right. That's everything. Fantastic. You guys have a great night. Enjoy your test tomorrow. I'll see you bright and early in the morning. If you guys have any other questions or concerns or want to go over anything else, you can come in early tomorrow morning. I will have extra help at about 7 a.m. in room 232. All right. That's everything. I'm going to turn this off because I'm tired.